I thought this evening I would talk about one of the defilements that particularly holds us back from making spiritual progress, and that's the defilement of fear and related form anxiety. Fear, bhaya, is mental state that is heavily based on delusion and ignorance. It's usually fear of the unknown that is the most predominant. We fear the dark, we fear strange noises, and because we don't know what's there. But more importantly than that, it's based on the primary delusion of a self, the atta. The Arahants or the Buddha has no fear, as they're abhaya, fearless. It's one of the attributes of an enlightened person is that they're absolutely without fear, because they have no remnant idea of a self in their being, so they have no sense of anything to lose. Fear is attachment to a self. One cherishes the self and doesn't want to see it change. And that which pertains to the self are the body, the possessions, the relationships, people that we love. These are all references to the self. Now, I am, I have. With wisdom, we see that there is nothing anywhere in conditioned existence that's resistant to change, that's immune to change. There's nothing that is stable and secure. Everything is constantly in a state of flux, of breaking up and falling away. And the sense of self and the sense of attachment makes beings resist that. They try and hold on to conditions as they are at this time, and they never persist for a moment. So if one's struggling to maintain that sense of stability, one's always feeling distressed because things are falling away, breaking apart. If you realize that that's the nature of things, that everything in the conditioned existence, including this body and this mind, is unstable, unreliable, breaking apart, changing, then there's no cause for distress or fear to arise in the mind. This is just the natural state of things. Whatever comes into existence naturally passes out of existence. Whatever is born naturally dies. There is no stable, fixed point anywhere. People are always looking for security, and it's not to be had. There is no secure point in the conditioned existence. The only safe, secure refuge is nibbana, which is the unconditioned, which is outside of conditioned reality. One time years ago, when I was on one of my trips to Boston, somebody was driving me and Ajahn around, giving us a tour, and they showed us some of the big buildings in Boston. And city of Boston is a center for finance and particularly insurance industry. And it's one of the big buildings. It's a headquarters of one of the big insurance companies. And the guy told us that building is leaning over a few centimeters every year, and they don't know what to do to shore it up because it's built on a bog. And Ajahn Emerald thought that was hilarious. The insurance industry, the whole premise of the industry is to keep you safe and secure. You're in good hands with Allstate. And here's this building sinking in sideways into a bog. This is the nature of all conditioned things. The body's not to be relied on. It's prone to sickness and aging. And no matter how we pamper it and take care of it, it's always falling apart and going awry. The mind can't be relied on. It's quixotic. It's constantly changing. There's nothing stable anywhere. And the way to deal with that is not to fight it, but to just recognize it. Just be present with it, and don't let it become an issue. And it's not an issue if there's no sense of self, if there's no sense of me and mine. Fear is also has a relationship to the time factor. It's always the mind that's projecting into the future that falls into fear. In the present moment, there's no fear. In the present moment, there's no self. And you think about it, the concept of a self is always a reference to past or future. We identify a self in either one way of doing it is to recite our personal history. If someone asks, who are you? I'll say, well, my name is such and such. I went to such and such a school, and I moved to this city, and I had that job, and so your identity is based on your past. But who are you at this moment? Without reference to the past, there's no sense of calling it a self. Or we reference the future in terms of our hopes and dreams or our fears. What might happen to me in the future. But at this moment, there's just experience. There's just mind arising to an object. And that's all there is at this moment. There's just consciousness and an object of consciousness. And there's no room in that process for a self. There's no possible reason for anything to be fearful in that moment. It's just consciousness and an object. Even a terrible, frightening object is not a cause for fear in the moment. It's only a cause for fear by reference to what might happen next. Anxiety is a particular manifestation of this defilement that's listed as one of the 5 nirvana. The Pali for anxiety is udachika kucha. And it's 2 words that are almost synonymous. And some clever person many years ago came up with an English translation for worry and flurry to carry over the sort of play on words from the Pali. Udachika kucha, worry and flurry. This is one of the 5 nirvana. The 5 nirvana are the hindrances which particularly reference obstruction to meditation, an obstruction to entering jhana. An obstruction is really not quite the right word. They're not like a roadblock. They're more like a byway that the mind wanders off instead of instead of being settled into stillness, doing the meditation, entering into jhana. The mind wanders down a bypath and gets caught up in things And the five nivarna are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, skeptical doubt, and uddhacca kucca, anxiety. Anxiety is a form of fear-based mentation that involves a lot of the cognitive process, the thinking process. And the mind gets caught in loops. You run scenarios. These people run these kind of worst case scenarios. What could happen, and keep running these around in over and over in loops in their mind. This is worry and anxiety, and it's a quite useless activity. There's absolutely no beneficial side to it. And it's quite silly if you're able to laugh at yourself for getting caught in it. That's one way out of it. And it's delusion based because it's based on unreality. Whatever might happen in the future, it hasn't happened yet, so it's not real. And if your mind is caught in the unreal, that's delusion. One thing to remember is that nobody ever is able to think their way out of worry. Worry has its own sort of dynamic, and is the idea, you're going to solve it. You're going to think this through and solve it. And you just end up running the loop over and over more and more. You just need to cut it off. And the particular practice that's recommended for overcoming worry is mindfulness of breathing, because it's stilling and simple, repetitive, very peaceful bodily formation. Some people find it more effective if they're trying to deal with anxiety. They find it more effective to make the center of attention on the belly, not in the form of the insight meditation where you take the whole broad focus, but to the narrow point. This is the way they do it primarily in Zen meditation is there's a name for it. They call it the har point. It's can be found mentally. That's a point just below the navel that is also the center of gravity of the body. And martial arts people talk about those centering themselves on the har point and then moving around it, so you're always centered. If you do your breath meditation focusing on that, it's a samadhi-based meditation. It's a focused enough object that one can go into jhana. And it has the advantage of bringing the mind down below the neck. People that are very used to thinking a lot and caught up in their thoughts, this could be a good alternative. And in terms of chakra systems, the defilement of worry, anxiety is often based down there. It's like you talk about butterflies in the stomach and knots, and people get ulcers from worry. This is all related to that area. And when that chakra is fully cleared and open, it's said to be the oceanic bliss. It's a release of all that anxiety. So it's a very useful point to center the meditation on if one is prone to excessive thought or prone to worry and anxiety. It's important to find a way to get past any worries and anxieties and fears. It's a real block to progress if you give in to fear and anxiety. The Buddha talked about this in one sutta. He says when I was still an unenlightened bodhisattva, he was meditating in the forest, and every time he heard a twig break or the wind blow, he would tremble with fear and trepidation. What's coming? This is some horrible man-eating tiger or some kind of yaka or something. And in the end, he said that he figured out to deal with the fear. If fear and trembling arises while walking, continue walking. If it arises while sitting, continue sitting. And don't get up until the fear and trembling has passed. Or don't cease walking until the fear and trembling has passed. So it's a kind of a simple advice, but it has some profound meaning. The essence is on a couple of levels. On the superficial level, as practical meditation advice, don't change postures to get away from the fear. Deal with the fear. Don't try to physically move away from it. But on a deeper level, it's just in general, don't run away. Don't try and escape back. Just continue forward. Somebody said the way out is down and through. An important aspect of a spiritual path is this courageous kind of fearless warrior spirit. You face your dragon that's down, and you don't run away. And this manifests itself in many ways. At the deepest level is that there's the fear of the void. There's the fear of emptiness, the fear of the abyss, and beings retreat to that which they know. You have to have the courage to step out. Some teachers develop, and Kema had this to a certain degree, and his teacher was renowned for it. They develop a ferocious persona on the theory that the student needs to be more scared of the teacher than they are of the void. So they won't dare back up. And some of the Thai forest masters, like Ajahn Mahabua, people were very afraid of him. And as part of the Thai forest tradition, that they would often send monks out to meditate in fearsome places. Sometimes actually dangerous places where there's tigers, or sitting on the edge of a cliff. These kinds of things. So one has to overcome the fear facing it. But also places that are considered scary because they're eerie or creepy. There's a difference in culture between Southeast Asia and West. If people are afraid of ghosts and spooky, feelings, it's usually here it's like old haunted houses that would raise that. But in Thailand, it's forest places, remote places. They think are haunted by ghosts and spirits. In ancient India, the monks would go and meditate sometimes in charnel grounds. Charnel ground is a place where the dead bodies were brought. And in ancient times in India, it was only the relatively wealthy that would cremate the bodies. Most people would just take them to the charnel ground and leave them. So there's all these bodies in states of half-rotten decay, and the monks would go and meditate there to face the fear of dissolution and death. Contemplation of your own death is maranasati, is a very useful practice recommended by the Buddha to remind yourself that you're going to die. Because that fear of death is debilitating. One has to learn to just recognize that and face that as a reality, not run away from it. It takes that spirit, that courageous spirit, to really abandon. to really overcome attachment to the body, attachment to life itself, or just attachment to existence. This is really the underneath the attachment to sensual desire. Much deeper than that is the attachment to existence. And it takes a courageous spirit to overcome these attachments. The Buddha himself came from Khattiya caste, the warrior noble caste. So a lot of his imagery and language would relate to the warrior noble caste, their profession, carrying of arms. So, analogies of like a fortified castle, protecting yourself from the defilements. There's one actually quite elaborate simile in one of the suttas. It goes into great detail about the fortress, and all the various virtues and defilements are recognized as aspects of the fortress. And we talk about cutting off the defilements. Ajahn Mahabua was in his youth a boxer, a Thai kickboxer, which is a very brutal kind of sport. And so you sometimes see in his talks, he sometimes uses his boxing imagery. Talks about facing down ignorance and hitting him, and he fell down, but he got up again. But I just kept pounding on him. So there's that, that sense is part of it, that we're in a kind of a struggle with the defilements. It's a close quarter combat, and we need to have that courage to go forward. Some of you will have heard my analogy I used before about crossing the creek. When I was in Thailand, there was one place that I stayed where, to go down to the eating hall every day from my kuti, part of the trip, I had to cross a little creek. And most of the time it was just a little trickle of water just over my ankles. But the day after a monsoon rain, it would be raging, and it would be well up my thighs, even almost to my hips, and very strong current. And it took 3 steps to cross the creek. And at first I could hold onto a branch on the near shore. And when on the 3rd step, I could grab a branch on the far shore. So both of those were quite okay. But there was one step in the middle with no support. You just had to plunge into the raging torrent. And it's no use backing up. You won't get your bowl of rice that day if you back up to the security of the branch on the near shore. And in the spiritual path, it's even more difficult, because at least in that creek, I could see the far shore, and I knew it was just one step I had to take, and then I'll be okay on the 3rd step. But in the spiritual path, before you attain nibbana, it's unknown, right? And the temptation in the mind is always to retreat back to the comfort and the imagined security of what's known in the conditioned existence. As even we know samsara is broken and it hurts and it's crappy, at least it's familiar, so you keep kind of backing up to it, holding on to that branch and not letting go. We just have to give it up, surrender, step out into the emptiness. I always think this is the image in the tarot cards, the first or the 0 card, the Fool. is shown as a figure like a beggar stepping out over a cliff as he watches a butterfly. It's called the fool. That's the wise fool. Well, he takes no regard. He just steps out over into the abyss. As long as you're trying to hold on to what's secure, what's known, your bodily comforts and ease, or your mental formations and conditions, your pet theories and ideas, then you're never going to get anywhere. You have to let it all go and just step out into the emptiness. When we think of the great heroes of the Buddhist tradition, starting with the Buddha himself, they were individuals who took no regard for safety or comfort or security. The Buddha left a pampered home life and just head off into the wilderness, and he practiced extreme asceticism and fasting for 6 years and came close to death. The Thai masters, they would, particularly in the old days, if you read Ajahn Mun's biography, very often they endured a lot of hardship because things weren't as secure as they became later for the forest monks. They was not well established, and they would go hungry, and just in their tudongs they would go for days without food, and that's just the way it is. So what? Just carry on. In the Zen tradition is Bodhi Dharma. He traveled from India to China to take with the teachings. And in those days, it wasn't booking a flight on Cathay Air. It was incredibly difficult to get from India to China. Had to travel through the mountains and wild animals and bandits and very little food or water. One of the famous Zen koans is, why did Bodhidharma go east? Why did he bother? And one of the traditional answers is because he was a stupid and ignorant old man. He gets to China, and at one point in his story, he was sitting meditating. He sat for 9 years meditating. I don't imagine he sat cross-legged without moving for 9 years, but he went into like a silent retreat for 9 years in the palace courtyard. And at one point, a young man approached him wanting to become his disciple. And Bodhidharma wouldn't have anything to do with him, wouldn't even answer him or look up at him. And to show his seriousness, the young fellow took his sword and cut his own arm off. This is how little attachment he had. This is it's also sort of the extremities of the Zen tradition. but the point is, these people were fearless. So don't let yourself become held back by fear. Don't be overly attached to your safety and your comforts. Give it all up. Be willing to step off into the void and abandon everything that seems like a security, like a safety, because it's a false safety, it's a false security. Anything in the conditioned realm is unreliable. There's only temporary pleasures, some momentary comforts. The conditioned realm is constantly breaking up. The analogy of the near shore and the far shore is one the Buddha used often. The near shore is this samsaric conditioned existence, and the far shore is nibbana. And we can't see the far shore from here, from the conditioned bank. that we have to just plunge out into the water. And then once one has realized this, then there's a true fearlessness. There's the fearlessness of the arahants, abhaya. One of the poetic epithets that's used for nibbana is the safe, secure refuge. So I think that's enough